My last video, I went into a lot of detail about drawing and I toned the canvas and it was very process oriented. This one, I'm just gonna paint without drawing. All right, so I'm just gonna start brushing in the background. I am kind of drawing with a brush. I'm just thinking about the shapes. So there's like a salt shaker that's right here. So I'm just sort of like painting around it. This bottom corner is gonna be a shadow. So I'm just trying to like map that out. And then the main measuring cup, I think the top is basically right about here. There's another measuring cup right here. It's a yellow one. This is always the fun part. I love starting paintings. Some cadmium orange. So I washed out my brush and I'm going to try and block in some of these measuring cups just so I can get the shapes in there. It's the most important part of the painting. So this is like the opening. And like I said, you take a risk when you don't draw first, but that's the fun part of it. In case you're wondering, I did saw off this paintbrush because it was getting in the way of the camera. Just trying to round this off. That's always the hardest part, is painting in an ellipse, like an opening of a glass or a bowl or something. It has to be symmetrical. So the right side of it, I'd say that's about halfway. No, there's a nice, this reflection in the salt shaker top is kind of interesting. This really isn't dark enough, but I just want to put that in there real quick. I'm leaving streaks in the paint. I like that look. I'm not trying to do a photorealistic painting. And see how I'm carving back in around this top? I feel like this top is too wide. Well, that's the other interesting thing too, is like you could draw into this if you had to. Like I said, I think that top is up here more. Yeah, I think that looks better. This measuring cup has an opening like this. That's starting to dry a little bit, so I can't get in there so well. But I could probably define the edge of this handle a little better. So one trick I use, and I used this in my last video, is a lot of times I'll turn the painting upside down along with the reference material. And that gives you a whole different like perspective on where things should be and if you have your shapes in the right location. And I can already kind of see a few things I want to change. It's good to create a variety of edges in your painting so that everything isn't so crisp. Like this one right here, you could just soften it a little bit. I like to go back and forth between painting the background and the foreground because it's like you can use the background shapes to carve back into the foreground shapes or the subject itself. I did a video on like how to blend acrylics like oils, and this is the opposite of that. I want the brush strokes to show. This is kind of a risk, but this is the time to do it. And you could take a big brush like this and just like soften some of this. I feel like some of these brush strokes in the background are a little bit too obvious, or they stand out a little bit. This really only works if the paint is wet. This is starting to dry a little bit. It's still having an effect. I kind of like it. That also helps too because it takes off some of the extra paint and it'll make it dry faster. I think it's starting to come together. This is like the beginning stage. You know, I was saying that you look at the darkest areas, and this shadow area of this cap is a lot darker. I don't want to use pure black because it gets too dark, and it's better to have a little bit of color in your shadow areas just to give it variety. I'm painting with the corner of the brush just to get into these smaller areas. It's like it's just faster and easier to use the same brush and just use it in different ways. I'm noticing too that this blue color is reflected in there. I'll have to put that in there. If it doesn't have depth, it's probably because you don't have the value right. So this needs to be darker. And then when I throw in the highlight on this bluish turquoise cup, that will make it stand out even more. I let this dry as I took a break, and I used a hairdryer to dry even further. And that helps because it's easier to paint on top of dry acrylic rather than trying to paint wet into wet. And I think what I need to do is refine some of these shapes and add highlights to them and maybe correct some of the drawing. Like I said, these ellipses really define these measuring cups. Helps to get those in there right. This is where the process gets a little more tedious. I feel like the majority of the painting happens in the first session. That last 20% of a painting takes forever because it just gets to be about refining shapes. And I'm starting to get into that stage. Some areas I might get more smooth like this, and then other areas I'll just leave them more expressive. And before I mentioned there's like these highlights in here. It's just like the effect from light going through glass. That's what I was saying before about jumping around the different areas of the painting. It's just kind of like figuring out how dark things should go and what color they should be. I'm also thinking about like trying to create some dynamic brush strokes that have like a direction to them. Maybe this can be a little more dry brushed. This is a little bit more defined now. I think I want to work on this. I think the glass and the silver reflection is an interesting part of this whole painting. But for one thing, I noticed there's some of the blue in there. That's about it right there. You should paint that salt color in. It's not pure white. It's kind of bluish. So it actually starts up higher. It's like up here. That's probably why this doesn't look right. So it's like here. And this is where I can cut into my measuring cup again. Straighten out that side. So I think the glass actually comes down to about here. And it's like a light blue color. So there's like this blue area and there's some here. I think what defines this edge compared to the wood is that it's darker and a little bit more magenta. So right about there. You don't have to mix your paints thoroughly. Sometimes if you have streaks in there, it actually looks more interesting than if you just totally blend it in. And then there's an edge that's lighter. I think it comes around here. And then there's like a really light highlight, like right there. That's what makes things look shiny is when you get the highlights right. This top edge, you want to clean up a little bit. There's like vertical streaks like that, and then this area gets real dark and cut into that blue a little bit. You could put the edge in there like I did on this blue one, and the top edge has the same highlight. It's this dark area that'll make that pop. Let's see if I can develop that. It gets real dark right here, and then it gets much lighter as you go further out. Just trying to soften these edges. It'll make it look more curved and three-dimensional if some of it's blended slightly. I'm noticing there's some of this bluish color in here too, which is kind of interesting. So let's see if I can get that in there. Like right there, maybe a little lighter. All right, so I have to smooth that out a little bit. I do think that this dark area will help define it better. I think that that's what's wrong with this handle is that edge right there should be more like that. So this handle is too long. So I have to move that hole further up. In this section, just going a little further. So that sort of cuts in here. It does get lighter along this edge. Now, since I didn't draw this beforehand, I know there's going to be distortions in here, but that's kind of my intention was just to paint without drawing first, just to make it more spontaneous. I kind of like how this is rendered pretty well over here. I mean, I could probably smooth that out even more, but I think I need to do something similar with this green cup. Some areas I like to add a detail to it and make it smooth, and other areas I want it to be totally expressionistic, like the background. I have this to rest my hand on. It's like used to be a T-square. I think these highlights are really important. You gotta make sure you get that ellipse somewhat accurate, or it's gonna look misshapen, and it's pretty hard to do this freehand. Let's see how that looks if I fill that in with the lighter yellow green. I think it gives it more of a sense that the sunlight is hitting it. I think maybe the inside of this blue one needs some work, but I want to hit that handle one more time. This side should be wider. It starts rounding out right there. I'm tempted to fix all this in here. Some parts of this rim are actually lighter than others. I think I need to fix some of these things in the yellow measuring cup. It's basically the same thing, you just gotta make it look more rounded. So I think that triangle right there is too distracting. Wouldn't mind getting some of that into that shadow area just by dragging it in there. Same here.